next speaker is Pastor Dwayne Van Vuren. He's a friend of us. We know him quite well. He's been in here. I've watched many videos by him from other conferences, so I feel like I know him really well, even though we may have only met a couple of times. And he's been around, and we've had a lot of discussions and meetings with him. He's currently the State Director for Alpha Crucis of Queensland and Northern Territories. He's an ordained minister, has a Masters of Leadership, and his academic interest is the intersection of Pentecostal theology and strategic leadership. That sounds really academic. In his past, he was in one of the top 3 R&D firms for Intel software. He's run his own business. He's been a senior pastor. He's been a trainer for small business entrepreneurs. He has planted churches. Here it looks like Pilates Circus. Yeah, great. And he's just given me an interesting fact that he really wanted me to share with you. He has also trained he's been a trained counterinsurgency instructor in South Africa. Apparently the definition of that is he knows how to help you kill people and hide their bodies. Oh, that's on live stream. Whoops. Would you welcome Pastor Dwayne Van Vuren?
You're not supposed to have shared the second piece of the definition. It's really lovely to be here today and to share with you. People always ask, how does that help? When I was a minister and a senior pastor, people would often ask, how does that actually equip you to be a senior pastor? And anyone who's been a senior pastor will understand there are certain congregation members you need that skill for. So, when Pastor Slavitt Pretorius spoke about hue today, I did a bit of Google on what hue is. It's the color appearance parameters of measuring light. And so when you look at it, it's like, is it a vivid blue, a light blue, or a dark blue? And so when hue means honesty, unity, and excellence, all blue, I've been given the opportunity to talk about excellence, one of the aspects, one of the angles of what is important to Accelerate Ministries and to us who partner with them. You said this morning, Pastor Slavitt, that it's about forging paths that will impact nations. And I think if you're in the room today, if you're watching by live stream and in any way connected to Slavitt, Slavitt and I meet and we'll have breakfast, and then both our 2 ICs, both our offices literally buckle after we've hung out with each other, because we both go back and say, hey, we want to do this, and this, and our organizations have to just deal with that. But I truly believe that your heart is to impact nations, and I truly believe that Accelerate Ministries is doing just that, and is going to continue to do that in the era that lays before you. And it's exciting that all of us get to partner with Accelerate Ministries in fulfilling that. It is about a strategic, purpose-driven life. And when you said driven this morning, my brain just went, drive means effort, drive means speed. In 2006, I was driving along the highway somewhere between Gosford and Hoi Hoi, and you have the cement wall this side, and you have the sand medium strip over here. I was driving a Toyota Prado, and I share the car because you'll see in a second. I was driving a Toyota Prado, and the back right wheel blew at 110 kilometers an hour. This big vehicle, traveling 110 k's an hour, lost its back tire. My dad used to be a motorcar rally driver, racing driver. I remember at the age of 9 in Cape Town going to the car races with Dad, and Dad would probably have too much, and we'd go racing back, and the back of the car didn't have car seats. It was a racing car, and so I grew up understanding speed. My father taught me how to drive a car. I had blue bruises all on my leg, not abuse, but just my dad making sure I understood how to be a defensive driver. And I remember in that moment that the tire blew and the car actually pulled out. We had just lost my father-in-law. He had just passed away. In the car was my wife, my mother-in-law, my son, and my daughter. My wife was knitting and had just put her knitting down. And if you come from South Africa, there were rusks that we were just handing out, homemade rusks. We were handing out in the car. And literally the tire went and we started to move down the highway. And all I remember is my father's words: don't touch the brakes, put your foot on the petrol, and keep it straight. And I fought as long as I could to keep that car going straight. I thank God that there wasn't a car around us, and we kept heading forward, and I kept it straight. And every time that more of the tire lost, more that the back rear end swung around, until it eventually hit the sand. And then we were traveling on the sand sideways until we hit a tree, and we flipped 3 times in the air and landed on the ceiling. Landed on the ceiling 3 times and landed on the tires. Now I know because my brother came and picked me up. We're both ex-cops, and so we went and did our own crime scene investigation of what happened. Thankfully, no one was hurt. My son was totally distraught that the rusks had been destroyed in the process. He sat on the side of the road going, no one's going to believe me, I don't even have a cut on me. My wife had 3 stitches in her head from the sunroof that had shattered in. But I tell the story to explain the value of mass and velocity and speed and the need to accelerate. The value of momentum is defined as mass multiplied by velocity. And so I really want to encourage you, Pastor Slubbert, your ministry, Accelerate Ministry, and what we're doing in partnership. We need to build mass. Had I been driving someone else's car, a little Nissan Micra, I would have kept the car on the road because, it's a small little tire, small little car, and not much mass. Had I been traveling 40 k's an hour, I would have kept the car on the road. But because mass combined with speed created a momentum that saw the vehicle take a life of its own. I really want to encourage us all as we partner with Accelerate Ministry that we become part of the mass and part of the speed, that this guy, his church and his ministry, his eldership, his leadership team can put their foot to the metal and accelerate, because as they accelerate, so we can travel further together. You see, it's about vision and it's about strategy. And there's 2 gentlemen, Tony Goldsby Smith and also Simon Sinek. And they have this thought. Tony Goldsby Smith has this thought that says, we know where we are and we know where we want to be. And for most of us, that's where we stop. This is where I am, that's where I want to be. And then we sit there overwhelmed. But we have to define the what and the how to get from here to here. Simon Sinek takes that thought further and says, we've got to believe. We've got to have a core belief that says, what's the cause or the belief that drives me to the what and the how that gets me where I want to be? And so as Accelerate Ministry, or partners with Accelerate Ministry, we've got to answer these 3 questions. Why do I do what I do? How am I going to do it? And what am I going to do? Now, the how is easy. Slubbert's already said it. Carl's already said it. It was in all the documentation you can read around. The how is I want to be a part of equipping people to honor God. That's why I'm here. I might work for a different organization, but I want to be a part of something that equips people, that brings glory to the name of God, that honors God. So why am I here? I think we'll all agree. We're here to equip people. We want to honor God. The next thing we want to look at is how. And if you've read the vision statement of the organization or you looked at the ministry, how am I going to do this? I'm going to focus on God's plan. It is about making disciples of all nations. If you haven't got that yet, then you actually haven't been listening. And there's red chairs over there in the corner for Slubbert to meet with you afterwards. If you're at home, call Slubbert, he'll come meet you. It's about God's plan. That's the focus. That's part of the how. The other how is focusing on God's people. Because at the end of the day, it is about loving one another. If you can't love someone here, how the heck are you going to love them in heaven one day? For some people, heaven's going to be hell. Because they're going to have to hang out with people they don't want to hang out with here. Someone just got that. Yeah, your mother-in-law's there too. By focusing on God's by focusing on God's people, we're also about being equipped by one another. I love the way it's framed, not equipping one another because we all think that we know best and want to do something in someone else's life. I love the way it's framed. It's about being equipped by others. So I understand it's about what needs to happen in me. And now the what. What do I need to do this? I will be like Daniel. And that's what I've been asked to speak on. I will be like Daniel. I will be excellent in all things. When you look at the Bible and you look at the book of Daniel and you look at the story of Daniel, and we can go all different places, and in the time permitted, I'm just going to touch on chapter 1 and chapter 6 and just a couple of thoughts through it. Daniel developed a discipline of excellence. And when we understand discipline, when I say the word discipline, we all think of getting into trouble. We all think of getting a hiding. We all think of being of it being punitive or restorative. But discipline is also defined as a branch of knowledge or a field of study, a rule or a system of rules governing our conduct or activity. And what Daniel develops, this discipline of excellence, is he's saying, I'm putting together, I am embodying a set of values, a set of rules, a set of conduct that will eventuate in certain behavior patterns and in an outcome. And we're going to look at this behavior patterns and the outcome in a moment. It is this discipline of excellence that has to undergird every decision, every habit, everything that we value as human beings, as being part of Accelerate Ministry, of being a part of partnering with Accelerate Ministry. When looking at Daniel, we start to get some insight into what this could look like for us. Daniel chapter 6, verse 3. Now, I take it you've all been to Sunday school, so I'm not going to give you the Sunday school version. I take it you've all heard the stories in Daniel, so I don't have to give you the stories. I'm just going to stick with the pieces that I want to share. If you want to, read the book of Daniel. Chapters 1 through 6 are 6 stories where God is trying to say something, and 7 further is about something else. But 6 chapter 3, then this Daniel became distinguished above all other high officials and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom because an excellent spirit was in him. I love the little words in the Bible, like so, therefore, because, but, and, because they're actually telling me something about something before and something after. It actually says that Daniel was distinguished because. If I said to you, who would like to be distinguished, the extroverts would all put their hands up. Some of the introverts would get halfway there. But we all would like to be liked. We all want to be distinguished. We all want to leave a mark. We all want to have a legacy. We all want to be remembered for the right things. And Daniel, it was said that he was distinguished because there was an excellent spirit within him. Oh, that it would be said about you and I that we are distinguished. Not for the wrong reason, but that it would be said about us because we have an excellent spirit within us. I pray that that would echo in our heart today, that would live on for the rest of our lives, that within us we are known as people who have an excellent spirit within them. Now, getting some context over here for what was happening, we can jump to Daniel chapter 1, and you see that what's happened is the king of Babylon has besieged Jerusalem. He's taken it over, and what he does is he takes from some of the nobility, some of the court, the royal lineage, and the young people of Jerusalem, and he takes back with him to Babylon because he wants to inculcate them in their ways. What a brilliant, I'm a strategist, I'm a war man, I understand warfare. What a brilliant way to take over a nation, but to take the cream of the crop, bring them, and make them like you. And so what he does is he brings it, and he specifically asks for a specific group of people, that they are young men without blemish, of good appearance, skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to be in the king's court. Now, if that list was in the opposite order, I'd probably stand a chance to some way, but because it starts with without blemish and good appearance, being bald, and looking like I look, I probably would be overlooked. But he looked for the best of the best, and they were to be inculcated in the Babylonian way, understand the Babylonian art, the literature, the magic, every part of what it meant to be a Babylonian. So this is the context that Daniel and his mates find themselves in this context, in a foreign culture. We're going to look at chapter 1, verse 4. They were youths without blemish, and I've just read that whole piece. A biblical scholar by the name of Baldwin draws our attention to the usage, the Hebrew usage of the term wisdom when this is written. When you see the word wisdom over here in Daniel, and it says that these people had to be full of wisdom, they're actually saying it is filled with ethical and religious overtones. It implies that Daniel, or these people brought over from Jerusalem, had a wholehearted commitment to the Lord and obedience to his will. That to them was wisdom. So if we're going to have an excellent spirit within us, and we're going to be like Daniel, the first thing that you and I need to possess is a wholehearted commitment to the Lord and obedience to his will. Am I a Sunday churchgoer? Someone wrote a book that said, "Who are you when no one's looking?" How do I answer that question? I think Pastor Ron Sims just spoke about, would people want to follow you, and what would they be following? Are we wholeheartedly committed to the Lord and obedient to his will? That was perceived as paramount for possessing wisdom. If you and I want to possess a spirit of excellence, we're going to have to be wholeheartedly, not slightly, not halfway, not on Sunday, wholeheartedly committed to God and obedient to his will. The second thing that I note in chapter 1, verse 4, was that the young men from Jerusalem, from the Jerusalem court that now found themselves in the Babylonian king's palace, they needed to be secure in their knowledge of God, to be able to study that local literature without allowing it to undermine their faith. They had to know who they were and who their God was. Otherwise, they would easily have been swept up and caught up in the Babylonian literature, and have changed what they believe. The second thing that we're going to need to possess, if we're going to have a spirit of excellence within us, is that we need to be secure in our knowledge of God. We need to be secure in our knowledge of God. Education is important. Proper teaching from the pulpit is important. Proper teaching in class is important. And I'm not just saying that because I am working in education right now and doing a cheap plug for Alpha Crucis. Far be it. I've been an ordained minister. I still am. I've preached as a senior pastor. And when I went and I learnt more about the Bible, there were nights I had to go home and repent and say, "God, I am so sorry. I have misrepresented you or your word." If I was Daniel a couple of years ago in a foreign culture, how secure would my knowledge of God have been? How secure was my knowledge of God that I would have remained true? That was challenging, even when I was preparing this. Even today, in the environment, the time we live in, the culture we live in, how secure am I in my knowledge of God? Daniel was. You see, for them to be a witness to God, their God, Daniel's God, our God, in the Babylonian courts, they needed to grasp the cultural presuppositions around them without losing who God is in their world. These two are still, the wholehearted commitment and the security in God are still relevant for you and me today. We can read Daniel's story. We can read the historical account and go, that was good for Daniel. I'm sorry, it's good for us. It was good for him. It's good for us. It'll be good for my kids. I'm a grandfather, and my oldest grandson started preschool on Tuesday. And my prayer, when I got sent the photo of him in his uniform, was, Father, that you would keep him in the system. God, that he would be wholeheartedly committed to you all his life, that he would be secure in the knowledge of who you are, even though he finds himself in a culture that might be unkind towards him. If you read further, Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, you actually read that Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food. Because they were in the king's court, they were looked after by the king. And I love the little word, but. Daniel goes, no, not for me. Not for me. Daniel resolved. You see, Daniel had decided how he was going to live in an environment that was going to be unsympathetic to his religious beliefs. And Daniel had to think about how he was going to exist. And according to some of the scholars, it was not about the food. It was not about the fact that the food might have been offered to gods. Largely, scholars agree that it was actually all about dependency. Daniel rejected the symbol of dependency upon the king for his well-being. He wanted to be free to fulfill his primary obligations to God, the God he served, the God he depended on. Daniel wanted to demonstrate that only God could have done it, to live for 3 years of vegetables and legumes alone, and yet look healthier and your well-being being better than anybody else who could eat whatever they wanted, could only have been God. So Daniel resolves, if I'm going to have an excellent spirit in me, my dependency needs to be upon God and upon God alone. Or you and I, as we develop an excellent spirit within us, dependent upon God, or like the other people that were in the court with Daniel, dependent upon the symbols of this world, the symbols of dependency of this world. The fourth thing that we need to take thought of is Daniel 1 verse 17. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skills in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. God gave them. God provides. God enables. Time doesn't permit me to actually share. I'm just going to tell you where to go and look. But if you read Exodus 35, verse 31, and they're busy starting to appoint craftsmen to build the tent of meeting, it actually says there that God gave them the skills. God gave them the ability. God gave them the spirit that they were able to build things, to be even to be creative. When someone says to me, I'm not creative, that's rubbish. God gives you the ability to be creative. You might not paint like I paint, you might not draw like I draw, but you certainly could look like one of the other artists, Picasso, for example, just throw paint on a thing and then go, that's art. But the reality of the matter is, I actually used to have a tie, a Picasso tie that looked like I'd had a Boost juice and then, anyway, enough of that. We'll leave that side where Carl said too. God gives. God provides. Moses in Exodus has a conversation with God, and Moses says, hey God, what the heck am I going to do? You're God. It's easy for you, not for me. I'm human. I've got a stutter and I've got all these issues. And God says to him, what's in your hand? What's in your hand? What's in your hand? What's in your hand? The fourth thing in developing an excellent spirit within you is an appreciation of what God has given you, what God has given us. It's not how much you have. Do you know that in this world we keep looking at the other person? I could look at Professor Mark. I could look at Mark and go to Mark, hey Mark, I just want to be a historian like him. Pretty cool. He's written so many articles. I said to him one day after I'd been in Alpha Crucis for about a year, I read one of his articles, and he can't even remember the article. I was floored. I was like, I read one of your articles. I don't have to be like him. God gave him an ability. I don't have to be like Slabbert. I don't have to be like Ron. I don't have to be like, is it Gustav? I don't have to be like Gustav. I am a life coach, but I don't have to be like that. Because that's God's call for him. That's what God's put in his hand, his set of experiences, the time that he was born, where he was born, how he was raised, and how God has redeemed all of that to use to bring God glory. God provides. As Accelerate Ministries stand in the beginning of its next decade, and you could worry, you could look around the room, you could look at the resources, you could look at the bank account. Stop. For Pete's sake. Look what's in your hand. God gave. Daniel had a spirit of excellence within him. Daniel was distinguished. Daniel appreciated what God had given him. 6 minutes. So, back to Daniel. Chapter 6. Daniel was distinguished because he had an excellent spirit in him. In verse 22, we read the fifth thing that I find that points to the spirit of excellence. The fifth thing is that Daniel was not compromised in any way. Look, I get it. I read the same Bible story you did. There was a decree, and Daniel didn't follow the decree. Daniel was guilty, black and white. Daniel is guilty regarding the decree, the conspiracy. You see, Daniel was known for stuff. Daniel was known as a man of prayer. He was actually known as a man who had a habit of prayer. And the conspirators knew this. And they took advantage of a discipline that Daniel was not prepared to omit from his lifestyle. And that's why when you read 6:22, the author of Daniel writes that Daniel was blameless in the eyes of God, and he had done nothing against the king. Daniel did not compromise himself in any way, shape, or form. If you read further, after the king realizes that Daniel's alive and realizes and goes, woohoo, I'm really happy that your God saved you. The king's language changes. And he makes a decree in Daniel chapter 26, Daniel 6, verses 25 to 27. And he talks about a living God. Daniel's excellent spirit within him has such a profound impact upon the king, who went to inculcate a group of Jews, was in turn inculcated himself. All this because Daniel had an excellent spirit. I love the concept. When you think of the concept, when he says that you're living God, two things are apparent. Number one, the king acknowledges God exists. But when he says living God, he also acknowledges that God is active in the world. And God is still active in the world today. Not only does he exist, if he can change a king's heart, imagine what he can change in our community, in our state, in our nation, and in the nations of this world. Daniel had an excellent spirit within him, and so was not compromised and brought glory to a living God. Daniel had an excellent spirit within him because he had a wholehearted commitment to God. He was secure in his knowledge of God. He had resolved to depend upon God and God alone. He had an appreciation of what God had given him, and he was not compromised. I love what it says in verse 28. Little word, so. Because of this excellent spirit, because of these 5 things at work within Daniel's life, so Daniel prospered. And my prayer is that Accelerate Ministries would prosper. My prayer is that every ministry represented here, every organization would prosper. My prayer is that every individual, every family, and I'm not just talking about you, your wife, and your 2 kids. I'm actually talking about from generation to generation to the 4th and 5th generation would prosper because we have an excellent spirit within us here today. In Daniel chapter 6, verses 26 to 27a. The king makes this remark, actually decree. For he, God, Yahweh, is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. I pray that our excellent spirit would lead to action and that action would bring glory to God, and that a future generation would make that decree about us and because of what we've done today and the days to come. Father, we just thank you that you are a God who loves. You are a God who has always and is still concerned, interested, living, and active in history, even as it's been formed in this moment. God, I pray that we would develop these 5 things that demonstrate an excellent spirit within us. Oh God, we know our humanity and our dependence upon you, our need for your word, our need for your spirit, our need to be in relationship with each other, accountable. We declare that. Help us be the people you've called us to be. Help us to develop an excellent spirit within us. And to you, Lord, be all the glory. In Jesus' name, amen.